Little wise, wise replies. Welcome to KidSay.
Hi, explorers. It's Ari here, your guide on KidSay. Welcome back to our podcast, where we explore the big, fun, and sometimes tricky questions kids like you ask. Before we begin, let me remind you, if you've got a question for KidSay, you can send it only through the KidSpace Stories and Music app. That's where I'll be looking, so if you're curious about something, that's the best way to reach me. Today's question is a huge one. Ready? It's this: does the world make sense? At first, you might think, of course it does. But then maybe you remember something confusing, like when somebody breaks a rule and nothing happens, or when something unfair happens at school. Then you wonder, maybe the world doesn't always make sense. So let's take a journey together. Let's look at how the world sometimes does, and sometimes doesn't, make sense. Have you ever dumped a whole box of Lego pieces on the floor? At first, it looks like a big mess, but then you start noticing things. The wheels go with the axles. The red bricks stack nicely. The little windows fit inside walls. Your brain works just like that all the time. It sees bits and pieces, sounds, colors, shapes, even feelings, and tries to fit them into patterns. That's why when you hear woof, you think dog. Or when you see something bright and round in the sky, you know it's the sun. Even babies do this. They learn to recognize faces and shapes before they can even talk. The world looks confusing at first, but our brains are always busy sorting things into patterns so life feels less messy. So in one way, yes, the world makes sense, because our brains help us find order in the chaos. Now let's play a guessing game. Do you know what word kids all over the world love to say? It's short, simple, and sometimes drives parents crazy. The word is why. Why is the sky blue? Why do cats purr? Why do I have to brush my teeth? Why? You probably ask this question all the time. And guess what? That's amazing. Every why you ask is like shining a flashlight into a dark cave. Each question helps you see a little bit more. So here's a secret. Asking why is one of the best ways to make sense of the world. Let's think about stories for a minute. Why do we love them so much? It's because stories are full of surprises. Something happens that doesn't seem normal, and your brain says, "Wait, that's strange." Imagine I tell you this. I made a peanut butter sandwich, and then it started flying around the kitchen. Your brain jumps up immediately. Sandwiches don't fly. Something's off. Maybe it's magic. Maybe it's a dream. Or maybe it's a silly joke. See? Your brain wants to make sense of the nonsense. That's what makes stories so exciting. Every fairy tale, every adventure, every movie you love is secretly a puzzle. Something strange happens, and you lean in to find out how it all fits together. Here's something interesting. Kids and adults don't always experience the world the same way. When you're little, you might see a barking dog as two separate things, a picture of a dog and a noise of a bark. Adults usually put them together instantly. That's one barking dog. That means the world doesn't just make sense on its own. It depends on who's looking at it and how their brain puts the pieces together. Kids are still learning how to connect the dots, and sometimes that makes the world look more surprising, more magical, or even a little more confusing. And that's not a bad thing. It means you're still discovering how things fit. But let's be honest, sometimes the world just doesn't feel fair. Maybe your teacher punishes the whole class when only one kid was being noisy. Maybe your favorite toy breaks even though you were careful. Maybe someone you love gets sick and no one can explain why. These moments feel like the rules are broken. They don't make sense, and that can feel scary or frustrating. So what do we do then? Well, there are different kinds of making sense. Science sense. The rain falls because water evaporates, makes clouds, and comes back down. Emotional sense. Rain ruins your soccer game, and that feels sad. Personal sense. You decide rain is fun because it makes puddles to jump in. See? The same rain can make sense in different ways. Sometimes we just need to switch our perspective. Let's play a game together. I'll say something that doesn't make sense, and your job is to imagine a way to fix it. Ready? My sandwich is flying. That doesn't make sense, unless you're in a cartoon where sandwiches have wings. The sun tastes like chocolate. That doesn't make sense, unless you're dreaming about a candy world. The cat is barking. That doesn't make sense, unless it's a super talented cat who can copy dogs. Did you notice how fast your brain worked? You can't help it. You want to turn nonsense into sense. That's how powerful your imagination is. So does the world make sense? Here are some ways to think about it. The world makes sense when you notice patterns, like day following night, or seasons changing. The world makes sense when you ask questions, like, why is the sky blue? Or, why do leaves fall? The world makes sense through stories, when something surprising happens and you figure it out. The world makes sense in your own way, through your feelings, your imagination, and your experiences. And here's the best part. It doesn't matter if you don't always have the answer. The act of wondering is just as important as knowing. Think about the biggest explorers in history, the scientists, inventors, and dreamers. They didn't always start with answers. They started with wonder. Why do apples fall from trees? Asked Isaac Newton. What's on the other side of the ocean? Wondered early sailors. What's beyond the stars? Asked astronomers who looked up at the sky. All those questions led to amazing discoveries. And it started with the same word you love to use: why? So the next time something doesn't make sense, don't feel frustrated. Smile and think, aha, here's another mystery waiting for me. That's how the greatest adventures begin. So, does the world make sense? The answer is yes and no and yes again. The world makes sense when you look for patterns, when you ask why, when you play with stories, and when you find your own meaning. And sometimes it doesn't make sense right away, and that's okay, because confusion is just the first step toward discovery. Stay curious, keep asking why. And remember, the world makes sense because you are here to explore it. That's it for today's KidSay. I hope this adventure into a giant question gave you new things to think about. Don't forget, if you've got a question you'd like me to answer here, you can send it through the KidSpace Stories and Music app. I can't wait to see what you're wondering about next. Today's answers were brought to you with help from trusted sources like The Guardian, Psyche, Aeon, and Gizmodo. See you next time, explorers!
That's it for today's episode of KidSay. If something made you wonder, that's a good thing. Big questions, little thoughts, even the weird ones. We love them all. So if you're curious about anything, open the KidSpace Stories and Music app on iOS or Android and ask us. It's free, and it all starts with your question. Until next time, stay curious and keep asking.